So these are two functions that I'm going to use here, but I'm not actually going to create until we come over to func.inc.php. So we first of all need to create the while loop and outline the while loop here. So let's go and say while not code exists code, and then in here we want to lastly echo this out, but we want to echo out shorten, and then we're going to provide two parameters to this. So the first one is going to be the URL itself and then the code. So URL code, and then once we have done this, i.e. once this condition is not met, we want to break one. Okay, so we're breaking out of the loop once we have this condition is not met, or this condition is met where the code doesn't exist. We're using the exclamation mark as not. So I'll further explain this just in case you don't understand. We've got if the code doesn't exist, and we're going to be creating this code exists function in a moment, then we're going to echo out the result of shortening the URL and the URL, well, we're supplying the URL, which is going to be, for example, google.com or google.co.uk, and then the code that's associated with it. So this shorten is essentially just going to shorten our insert our record into the database, the URL and the code. So we've got URL and code. We're inserting these two values, and then the function is also going to return the code. Okay, and then we're going to break, and then that's it. We're done. We've inserted it, and we've already echoed it out here. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our code exists and shorten function. Okay, so function code exists, and obviously we're supplying a parameter which is code. Okay, so we need to first of all access the database. Now the problem is that we've not actually connected to our database yet, and we're going to do that inside of our db.inc.php file. Okay, so the code obviously is all it's essentially going to do is connect to our database. So we have the MySQL connect function, and this is going to connect to our server, and then we're going to be using the MySQL select DB function to actually select the database. So let's enter our credentials here. In my case, they're obviously going to be different to yours. I'm connecting to localhost because generally that's what you would use to connect to the current server that this is running on. And we need a username, which in this case is min_Alex, and then we need the password. So let me just copy over and paste in my password. Okay. The database that we're connecting to is, if we open up PHP MyAdmin, we've got min_Shortener, so that's the name of our database, min_Shortener. Okay, let's put the E in there. Okay, so we've connected to our database, and now we need to include this in our function.inc.php file. So include db.inc.php. So this is going to connect to our database with this data here, and then we're going to come down, and this will allow us to actually connect to our database and check if our code does actually exist. Okay, so pretty straightforward if you've used MySQL databases before. Okay, so our code exists function is, first of all, we're going to create a query, code exists, code exists, and that's going to be equal to MySQL query, and then inside here we're going to actually create the query. Now the query is going to be select count, so we're using the count function, and in brackets we're specifying where we're counting from, and this is where our URL ID comes in. So we insert URL ID, so this is going to return the number of rows essentially. Okay, so we're selecting the count URL ID from, and our table name. So our table name is URLs. Okay, where code is equal to, and then in here we have the value of the code that we've passed to this function, which is code. Now the one thing that we do need to do is we need to escape this data, so it can't be we can't perform an SQL injection. Now obviously we there's no user input here. However, just for security, we're going to say code is equal to MySQL real escape string code. So if you're unsure what this function does, you can look at the MySQL tutorial series on the PHP Academy channel, and you will look into security there, or go over to php.net and look this up in the function library. Okay, so we are protecting our code, and then we are performing our query. We then need to return the amount of rows. So we need to say, well, not the amount of rows, but we need to create a check here. So we're going to say return, and we're going to have a condition. If this condition is equal to 1, we're going to say true. Otherwise, we're going to say false. So we need something here to equal to 1. Okay. And in this case, it is the result that we grab from our query. So MySQL result, in brackets we say code exists. We're taking two parameters in this function, which is the query that we've run, which is here, and then the basically this is usually the record count, or where the record we're starting from, and we'll only return 1 here because we're just counting with this query. So essentially what this here does, which I'm going to highlight now, is return the amount of rows that we select with this condition here. So for example, if the code is already in the database, we're going to return the value of 1. Okay. If the code isn't, in fact what we can do is at the end of here we can put limit 1. If the code does exist in the database, we're going to return true. We're returning true. Otherwise we're returning false. So if the code doesn't exist, when we use the function here, this will return false. So while not false or while not true, remember what we're returning is true or false, then we do this. So if we say if not code exists, so if the code doesn't exist, we do this. If the code does exist, we don't do anything. We basically loop through until the code doesn't exist. This means that if the code does exist on first loop, then we loop again until it doesn't exist, and we regenerate our code. And in actual fact, the way I've written this out now is not going to work. So I'll tell you why. This is a mistake that I've just made. The code is going to be generated here with the gen code, the function we've already created, and it's going to be assigned to this variable code. It's then going to consistently check this static value that we've already created. So the way around this is, if we take this gen code here and we get rid of it and we put it inside of here, we're going to constantly update this. So if code doesn't exist and we generate a code, or in fact what we need to do is say code equals, so we're assigning this every time we loop. So if this code that's generated here and put into this variable here does exist, we then loop again, but this time we regenerate a code because we include it in this while condition here. Okay, so as opposed to defining it here, which would just input 1, which would just, will have a static value to it, we have a dynamically generating value just in case it does exist. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so now what we want to do is go ahead and test out our page to make sure everything's working. Oh, in actual fact, no, we need to create this shorten function here. Let's just go ahead and get rid of that for now and put code there just so we know that this works. Okay, so let's upload our files that we've updated. There's 3 of them, and let's come over to here and here. Right, okay, so www.google.com co.uk, press enter. Okay, so successfully shortened, we've generated this code. Let's go ahead and do it again. And there we go. So everything's working. Now we can go ahead and we can restore that function there, and we're going to create this shorten function. Now, like I said earlier, shorten is just essentially going to take the URL that the user's typed in, which is here, and it's going to insert that next to a code, okay, which would then later, when we create our htaccess and then add the function in index.php, or create the redirect function in func and call it from index.php, we can actually redirect the user. But we're not going to worry about that for now. We're going to take it one step at a time.